Welcome back, dear viewers. You're still watching Nile Cruise from the Yacht Club, dear viewers. And in this segment, the Nile was held up to the ancient people as the source of life in Egypt and an integral part of the lives of the gods. The Milky Way was considered a very important mirror of the Nile, and it was believed the sun god Ra drove his ship across it. The gods were intimately involved in the lives of the ancient Egyptians, and it was believed that they caused the river's annual floods that used to take place, of course, which deposited the fertile black soil along the arid banks. And dear viewers, in this context, we have with us today a very special guest, Dr. Youssif Mazhar, who is a member of the Egyptian Scientific Institute. A very good day, sir, and it's a pleasure to have you with us in today's episode
It's a pleasure having
of
you
Nile Cruise.
on the Nile in the Yacht Club.
Thank you very much, Dr.
Pleasure.
Youssif. If we go back and talk historically, from a historical perspective, especially about the history of ships in the Nile, where did it start? How did it start? What did the ships look like? How did they, go with the wind, against the stream, and so on?
Look, it's a very interesting subject, and the way you've put your question, it gives us a lot of latitude to talk a lot about ancient Egypt and the Nile. Now, of course, the Nile was an artery, and Egypt has always been a south to north system. And if you notice that along the Nile, all the ancient Egyptian temples were on the Nile. You'll also notice that a lot of these temples were and the people also lived on the east side of the Nile. And when somebody died, when a king died or when a pharaoh died, he was transported to the west side of the Nile. So the Nile became an artery for all movements, south to north and north to south, and also across west to east and east to west. So,
so the living were on the east and the dead were on the west?
Yes.
So, I mean, because we can imagine now, so if I'm living on the west of the Nile now, I mean, this
No, still,
this
we're still all alive, very much alive. But
Yeah.
we are now in Giza, of course.
Yeah.
And as you know, the pyramids are in Giza. And also Saqqara is on this side of the Nile. And Saqqara, you hear every day the amount of things that come out of the Saqqara, because Saqqara was the burial area of Thebes, in Arabic Tiba. So this east, west, and north, south makes you think, well, ancient Egypt, which we're talking about 5,000 years ago, what did they have? What did they ride to go across? So let me give you some very interesting little points. I'm sure you're going to like this.
Of course, I like anything you say.
The first ships, or the first boats, were paddle boats. So the ancient Egyptians in Europe, crossing the rivers, they would break down a tree, push the log into the river, and sit on it and paddle. Now, we didn't have trees in ancient Egypt. We don't have trees in this. But we have papyrus. So the first Egyptian floating ships were papyrus reeds bound together, made in a certain shape, and the young people would paddle these like the boys in Aswan now, you see them from the steamer. But these were papyrus. Papyrus is a reed that grows goes wild, and it was replanted by a very honorable gentleman who was our ambassador in China. So the first ships that ever floated on the Nile were papyrus reed ships. Now, let us see, where did the ancient Egyptian use his ships? Of course, if he was walking along the banks, he could only walk at a certain distance. And when he wanted to cross, because the religion, as you said in the introduction, very nice introduction you made, that Ra, all this part, it's very important that these gods come also into the story of the ships. Now, first, I look at the religious point of view. The ancient Egyptian believed that he would live, and then he would rule if he was a pharaoh, or he would live as a normal person, and then he would die. Now he noticed that the sun came out from a certain area. Where did it come out from? It came out from the east. And where did it go? It went down on the west. So he believed that man was created here, lived a long life in the daylight, and when he died, he would go into the darkness.
The West. Yeah.
Now, everybody believes in eternity, and ancient Egypt was very strong on eternity. So after he died, he would like to come up again. If he was a pharaoh, he'd like to come up again. Now, they made it very difficult for him. Why? This dark part, which was the burial, was all full of gates. And gates you could pass by ships or by giving secret words at the gates. So he had to recite certain things. There were 12 gates, there were different things, and he had to recite all these things. If he answered properly, he would come up again and come up like the rising sun. If not, he would not. So here again, so it's his belief of a new life. He's taking this model and having it in his own life. That's the Nile. The west is on this side, the east is on that side. And this whole made the question of crossing the Nile a very big element.
Oh, you put it wonderfully. You put it wonderfully.
I think it's simplified. I hope you get it.
Yes, of course,
Yeah.
sir. Dr. Youssif, according to some myths, it was Isis who taught the people the skills of agriculture, and others said it was Osiris. And in that time, the people would develop canals, irrigation, and sophisticated systems to work the land. Your own motto and perspective, sir.
Well, look.
And the truth, of course. We need to know
Yes.
who was the reason.
Well, let me say the following. Of course, Egypt is a very longish country. Actually, all our lives, the Nile has been the focus.
The
All
source
the
of
Nile
life.
banks on both sides. So we have to always think of traveling that way. Also, we have to think of irrigation that way. Now, the canals were made not so much for transportation. They were made to take the water and bring it under a controlled way. As you see now, even the Nile now, as we are recording, is a bit on the high side, you see, because the floods used to come. Ancient Egyptian would take the flood and stem it and use it. But we will concentrate again on the ships. What are the ships that he used? First of all, we said he started on papyrus, all right? Because papyrus would float very nicely. Also, papyrus was on all the islands. You had papyrus, and you would bind it together, and you would have a ship. Now, I would like to say something, because I know that your program is heard and appreciated by a lot of foreign listeners here in Egypt and abroad. There was a Thord Heyerdahl. He was a Norwegian man. And this Norwegian man was fascinated about ancient Egypt. He even thought that the ancient Egyptians had gone all the way to America and discovered America. So he came here, and he came to this club here. And he talked to everybody, and he talked about these papyrus ships, etc. And he built one here. And he took it, and he sailed it. He took it abroad. He sailed it, and he sailed all the way to America, and it sank in front of the American coast. Just to prove that the ancient Egyptians had, not Christopher Columbus, but the ancient Egyptians had tried to be there. So you see that ships and papyrus, because we don't have very much wood, was very important in ancient Egyptian history. Now,
then, of course, there was a development of the building of
Yes.
Of ships and
Very good that you're asking me, because from papyrus you have to move forward. You can't just have papyrus. In fact, the papyrus, it used to absorb water.
Yeah.
And slowly
Yeah.
it went down. And actually, when Thor Heyerdahl, he wrote a book, by the way, and talked about Egypt. it sank, slowly. It went down in front of the coast. Now, uh, Egypt did not have so much papyrus. It came a lot from Chad, along on the, or up the Nile. So after a while, the ancient Egyptian started to travel. And he started to travel by going across the Mediterranean or going along the Red Sea. And he went to countries that had trees, like Lebanon, for example. So the Pharaoh, Egyptian Pharaoh, would send a ship from Egypt here to whoever was in charge in Lebanon or Syria or the area of Cyprus, and the ship would wait there and load with these wooden timber, and after that, all ships started to be
Built from wood.
wood. Now, if you go to the grandiose ship and near the pyramids, it is made of wood. Now, we have to be very careful. Is the ship that is now outside the pyramids, is that a ship? What kind of a ship? He must categorize ships that carry people, ships that carry obelisks, ships. Can we stop a minute because you can't have this noise?
Dr. Youssif, of course, you were talking to us about the ships and the wood and so on and etc.
Yes.
etc. Could you please continue, sir?
Yes, I will continue. Now, we decided that there were different kinds of ships. We also said that you had to cross the Nile. So let us see what were the ships and what did they do. First of all, ancient Egypt was famous for a lot of things like obelisks, for example. Every, let's say, temple had obelisks. The obelisks were replicas where everything was written on them. And they were very, very heavy. They were 90 tons heavy. And they came from a certain part of Egypt, which is Aswan. Aswan, you found a certain kind of stone, which only is there in Aswan. So if the ancient Egyptian wanted to build a temple, he had to have an obelisk. It's like a miniature of a mosque now. And he had to transport this piece of obelisk. He had to transfer it all the way to some other place, far away, where it will be used. So what happened was that they worked these very heavy obelisks, and these heavy obelisks had to be transported on a boat. So the first boats the ancient Egyptians made, they could not make a boat like this with 90 tons. So they made what we call a two-pronged boat. And they put one obelisk here and one there. So the obelisk would be cut in Aswan, loaded onto the boat, and transported. Where are the temples? Luxor. So transport these to Luxor. So the ancient Egyptian used the Nile as the most important way of transferring raw materials, etc. The pyramids, we said, are on the west side of the Nile. But where are the quarries? Some of the quarries are on this side, like the Bokatam Hills, etc. So he would cut. He would cut and have to transfer these blocks of stone to the other side. So this transfer of materials was a big thing on the Nile. There was another very interesting, I think you're going to like this. Of course, ancient Egypt had a very religious past, and there were feasts. There were feasts where people would move from Luxor to Aswan, from one temple to another temple, and lots of things would happen there, and they had to come back. So it's not a matter now of going across the Nile. It's a matter of going along the Nile. Now, what did he do? He discovered that he doesn't have to row. He discovered he can have a sail. So he put up a sail. The sail would take the wind, and where did the sail come? Where did the wind come from? Usually it came from the north. So he could go from the north, from Luxor, for example, to Aswan, or Asyut to Luxor, this way up the Nile with his sail. Now, when he finished all his, let's say, the formalities and things, he would want to come back.
And that's a problem because you said most of the time it comes from the north.
Yes,
So how?
it's a problem.
Yeah.
So, and because I'm a sailor in yacht club here, to sail against the wind, you have to do
Yeah.
this. You see,
Yeah.
but he did something. He waited till the Nile flood came, took down his sail, and he floated down
with the currents.
down the current.
With the current.
Okay,
Oh,
so
how wonderful.
that was now two kinds of transportation. One was equipment, obelisks, raw material, etc. Now, what about the life that we started the program? And you were asking me about the life. Now, when the pharaoh died, they would have a very big procession, and the pharaoh would be taken in a ship, and this ship was only there to cross the Nile, but a very grandiose ship. They would take him to the other side where the graves were. If it was Luxor, it was all the graves that are there, and it would stop there, and the king would then be unloaded onto his burial place. So this ship, of course, is not the ship of the obelisk. It's a very fancy thing. Lots of priests singing hymns, praying for him.
A royal ship.
The royal ship. And these royal funeral ships, you see them everywhere. And the beauty of it, if you go to Tutankhamun's burial place, you will find ships there with Tutankhamun across the... Why? He needed ships in the New World. He had been used to it. He died and he traveled across the Nile as buried. So he had to have his ships there. So in the graves, there were replicas, beautiful replicas of these ships. And the more the pharaoh was strong, the more ships he would have.
Well, we've learned now that not only the Nile, Rana, was sacred in Egyptians' life. In fact, the ships on the Nile, from that perspective, were also sacred.
And of course, a ship that would carry a pharaoh to his grave with everybody following and all the priests must be different from the one that is carrying an obelisk or a piece of stone, you see. So this moves you to the idea of a ship on the Nile going to the north, going to the south, going across to the east, and going to the west. Let me before...
Dr. Youssif, of course, sir, your stories never end. You're an encyclopedia, and we need episodes and episodes to spend with you and know more about everything that you need to tell us. In another episode of Nile Cruise, we'll be continuing your wonderful stories that we always love to listen to, sir. We thank you so much for today's episode and for your interesting information and for the very important information that you gave us in today's episode of Nile Cruise. Thank you so much, sir.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Youssif. And as Rana said, I know that we never get enough of what you say, really, really. And I know that you have much, much more to say. So I guess we promise you, dear viewers, that Dr. Youssif will be with us in another episode and continue to talk about the history of ships on the Nile, because I think, I'm sure,
a lot. Each
a lot.
time we come to the yacht club,
we really enjoy your
you wanted
your
to
talk.
say something,
so,
sir,
I want to say something.
Okay, go ahead.
You, as our beautiful commentator and all the beautiful questions, you do not ask me about the Queen of Egypt, Hatshepsut.
No, we
That's
intended to.
Caravan.
We intended to, of course. But
I
we
say
were not
that
gonna.
it's because
you
the
have
time.
not helped us to go with Hatshepsut.
No,
The
sir.
great
Of
To
course,
Puntland. To
of
Puntland.
course, sir.
The-
I intend to.
I know,
But we're gonna.
We'll
do
leave it
this
to another
in
episode.
the next
Schedule,
episode when we're with you here
Yes.
at the yacht club again. You're always
Unfortunately,
joining
it's the
us.
time factor,
But
I
it's,
Dr.
understand.
Youssif.
it's not
more.
me,
Thank
it's
you
out of
very
my
much,
hands.
very much,
Dr.
and
Youssif
thank you for-
Mazhar, a member of the Egyptian Scientific Institute and an encyclopedia. And it's always a pleasure to have you with us because your knowledge, of course, is endless, infinity. And we always have the pleasure to have you with us in our episodes, sir. Thank you so much for joining
Always
us.
pleasure to have you here.
And we'll get to know more, dear viewers, about Hatshepsut and her trip to Puntland
Next
with
time.
Dr. Youssif Mazhar in an upcoming episode of a Nile Cruise, God willing. Please stay with us, dear viewers. Rana and I will be back.